Hi Jamie, thank you so much for joining me today. I know that in your role, kind of across phase and working with children and young people with social and emotional health needs, that would be really important for us to think about the important role that schools can play in supporting children who've been traumatically bereaved.
Absolutely, thanks Beck. So I work with primary and secondaries with SENCOs, class teachers, school leaders, but obviously with children with traumatic bereavement, they worry sometimes that they're not doing enough. Are they doing the right things? Are they doing the wrong things? But I think all schools are fantastic at making sure they've got positive relationships with their students. But I think, we have to ask the question sometimes, is that enough? Do we have to do other things apart from just have a good relationship with the student?
I think, thank you, Jamie, that's really important. That relationship is absolutely fundamental. We know that in traumatic bereavement, the meaning the child has made from the death might mean that they now see the world as a scary place or somewhere that they can't trust, and therefore we'll probably need to do more than we would do if we were supporting a child in a bereavement where that wasn't that kind of trauma component aspect to what they've experienced.
Thinking about the video and the animation, I think it's really, really important. One of the key things that came out of it for me was that relationship with home and that importance about keeping that going, because without that, we can't really do much else. But because a lot of the information comes from there.
I would absolutely agree with you there, that we know for all bereaved children, engaging with home is going to be important. But with those that have been traumatically bereaved, that becomes even more important. Potentially the circumstances around the death have been quite difficult, or the way the child has made meaning from and what happened in the death and what it means for them is difficult. So us knowing what the child and young person knows, what's been explained to them, the language that's been used, can really help school be in a better position to have effective communication with the child. And recognising that it's probably not going to be a one-off conversation with the family, and of course it won't be with the young person, that we'll want to keep checking in to find out how things are. Has new information been explained? There is a potential for misinformation, that children didn't quite understand what was being explained to them. So being able to pick on that can be a way that we can help minimise some of the difficulties they might have making sense of the death, and finding out exactly what language is being used.
Yeah. And I think we see in the video that Jeannie has those conversations at home about Wesley, don't we? And we need to make sure that we need to have those little insights of information so that Jeannie can use those in her communication with Wesley. What football team does he support? Those little nuggets of information can't be underestimated, really.
Yeah, definitely. And recognising that the family are also likely to be grieving, and maybe affected by the trauma as well. So in our efforts to communicate, we'll want to be gentle and sensitive, and in pace, at the right pace with the family as well.
So Beck, that communication, that keeping that relationship going with home is so important, really, isn't it? Because obviously we need to have those insights, we need to have that information so that we can monitor what's happening, so that we can look for the differences, look for those patterns of behaviours.
That can be really helpful to keep that communication going with home, and that providing us with an overview. Jeannie might have recognised with Wesley in the animation that he's struggling with PE, that he's not engaging, but actually school will also want to look at other parts of the school day. What's he like in maths? What's he like at lunchtime? What's he like on arriving at school, maybe? But equally check in with mum. How's he engaging at home? Is the lack of motivation we're seeing in school and withdrawing from peers also something that mum has seen at home, maybe? One of the things that's quite helpful when we're wondering about traumatic bereavement for a child or young person is to have some ideas in our mind, domains that help us monitor the level of difficulty. So we might monitor for persistence. How long has this been going on for? A few days, weeks, or is it many months? And then frequency. How often is it happening? For Cara, is this every now and then? Or are her angry outbursts happening several times a week or pretty much every day? And then severity. How serious are these difficulties? Is Wesley feeling pretty low, or can we see that he's utterly despondent? We can also think about duration. How long do these difficulties last? Is this a few minutes and then the child or young person can get on with everyday life? or are there much more lengthy periods of distress? And then change. Do things seem to be changing and getting better or getting worse? And then how does this compare to them before the death occurred? One of the other things that can be helpful is think about, if they're grieving, are they able to dip in and out of puddles? We see Prisha in the animation, who's able to, she feels really sad when she's missing her mum, but then she's able to enjoy the distraction of hanging around with her friends and having some kind of typical fun with her peers. Whereas for Wesley, we're seeing it's not so much a dip in and out of puddles. It's that I'm stuck in the well, I don't know how to get out.
The staff in school, really, they might be able to see that, but perhaps because obviously Wesley's in the secondary schools, they might just see in their lesson. But I think it's that monitoring is so important, because are they the same in my lesson? And that communication between staff then is really important, isn't it?
Yeah, and obviously with so many pressures on time, that can be really difficult to achieve. But just having a joined up conversation with the people that know Wesley and see him across the school day and across the week, so that we can start to join those dots and get a picture of what he's like. And then of course for Cara in the animation, her grief looks quite different. We see a little bit about her having angry outbursts and being quite overwhelmed with her emotions in a different way. So I guess our monitoring is going to be across the school day. What's she like at lunchtime? What's she like in assembly? What's she like outside on the playground? How is this impacting on her relationships with her peers, as well as her relationships with school, as well as her learning, and checking in with her carers at home as well, and maybe finding out that actually at night she's bedwetting again and she's having lots of nightmares, and those kind of things would start to form a fuller picture for us that maybe that we're worried quite a bit more.
So Beck, after the school has done the monitoring and the communicating with the home to make sure that, that then shows that it is, Wesley, for example, is in his well and he's finding it really, really difficult to come out of it. I think it's at that point we need to really consider of who we refer on to, who we could then ask and seek specialist support, because school staff aren't specialists in bereavement and in specifically not traumatic bereavement. So I think it's important for schools to have the confidence to know, or to think about when they know when to refer on to.
Yeah. You're absolutely right that all that information that's being used during that monitoring period can be really helpful then in kind of pulling it all together and working out that actually we are very worried about this young person. One of the things we know about traumatic bereavement is there is an increased risk of children developing mental health difficulties as well as their grief. So we may see a presentation of post-traumatic stress symptoms. We might see some anxiety or some low mood kind of depression symptoms. We can even have difficulties with conduct. So being mindful of that, and that those needs are best met by mental health professionals, really. Yeah. If there's a safeguarding concern, we're going to want to go straight away because we've got concerns about the child's ability to look after themselves and keep themselves safe if they've got some kind of self-harming or suicidal thinking. If we're thinking about a referral without that kind of urgent safeguarding need, then we want to talk about it with the young person and say, look, we can see that this is really tough for you and we'd really like to see whether there's some more specialist help we can get you. And of course, we'll bring the family in as part of that engagement to kind of work with them on that. I think one of the important things is then working, well, who do we go to? With traumatic bereavement, it's quite likely that the trauma is disrupting the ability to grieve. And therefore we might need some specialist help with that trauma to enable that young person to grieve. That support may be available from a local bereavement charity that can manage to help address both of those, and there may be times when it's best placed with a local CAM service, and therefore schools following all their usual kind of procedures to make that referral to CAMS.
But I think at that point as well, the schools really need to be mindful of supporting themselves, because obviously this is, this isn't an everyday occurrence. So for Jeannie in particular, Wesley's key person, she needs to be mindful of her own thoughts, feelings and emotions around this. Who's she getting support from? And I think that team around, supporting each other, because if we want her to be able to support Wesley, we need to support her. So she needs to make sure that she has somebody to go to, and for her to be brave sometimes and think, actually, I'm not the right person today to manage Wesley, and for her to be mindful of herself in this situation at all times.
Yeah, I think that's really important. We can't underestimate the impact that supporting a bereaved young person can have on an individual. And it probably should have a bit of an impact. You know, we should be connecting with the emotions of that person and what they're going through. But we want to keep ourselves safe and able to do a good job. And therefore, we'd hope that Jeannie's got her SENCO team around her. We'd hope she's got her colleagues looking out for her, and that when she needs to step back from supporting Wesley, that someone else can say, I can step ahead. I've also got a good relationship. Let me come alongside Wesley for a while and keep that relationship going.
And I think hopefully then that monitoring, you know, when the specialists team is involved, that monitoring must still continue, because, you know, he will still have bad days, but hopefully we'll start to see some glimmers of hope and glimmers of light, and you know, so that the well is starting to you know, that he is coming out of the well, and for obviously people to recognise that he may have bad days, but it's we obviously want a pattern of more good days than bad, and that hope is always there that he will be able to you know, to feel supported and loved and safe and secure again.
Yeah, I really like that you've mentioned that hope. I think that's one vital thing that might seem insignificant that schools can do, that they can hold that hope and they can keep that belief in the young person, that even though you're in the well right now, that doesn't mean I think you're always going to be in the well, and I'm going to keep offering support, and I'm going to keep offering and holding on to the future that I want you to have and that I believe you can have as you begin to manage your trauma.
Those glimmers of light, isn't it? Those glimmers of hope, and looking for that positivity, and that's what, you know, why that monitoring needs to continue. Because do you know what? He might not be in every maths lesson, but if he's in one more this week than he was last week, then that's a glimmer of hope, and that's that. We need to really hold on to those little glimmers.
Definitely, thank you, and I think that really highlights how important and significant the role of schools can be.
Absolutely.